It's time for Agriculture, presented by Turkana Farms in Germantown, New York, a small-scale producer of heritage breed livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres. They also produce a full array of garden vegetables, many of them heirloom varieties raised naturally, as well as an assortment of berries, including raspberries, blackberries, gooseberries, black, red, and white currants, mulberries, and elderberries. And now, here's Mark Scherzer.
During the last couple of weeks, I've had a taste of what so many of you have endured for the last 5 months, being entirely on my own. My nephew Troy and his girlfriend Victoria were away becoming newlywed, while my pand-ami Eric, after 10 days of hiking in the Adirondacks and a brief few days back on the farm here, returned to New York City. In some ways, the solitude supercharged my productivity. Without accommodating myself to anyone else's schedule, I could do what I wanted to do whenever and for however long I was driven to do it. It gave me a certain sense of satisfaction. I planted most of what I still wanted to get into the garden, the last succession plantings of cilantro, dill, beets, turnips, carrots, and radishes, but also those vegetables that are uniquely suited to August planting for a fall crop, a second wave of sugar snap peas and collard greens, escarole, and spinach. I still plan on putting in a next wave of lettuce and a bed of tatsoi. If I get that done today, I'll feel like I'll be much prouder of my fall garden than my summer one, where the tomatoes are just getting around to fruiting and the pepper plants have only now gotten to a size where they can support peppers. My late planting this year and insufficient time spent on fencing have made me feel like the garden existed more for the marauding critters than for me. But with solitude also comes being lost in one's thoughts. During the initial days, one dismaying thought that crossed my mind and got stuck there was that I might be turning into my paternal grandmother, Eva Scherzer. What brought her so strongly to mind was that she spent her later years largely in solitude, particularly in the summer months, at her big old Victorian house at the top of Main Street in East Branch, New York, a tiny hamlet near the source of the Delaware River. As far as I could determine, Grandma Eva spent her time there almost entirely gardening and reading. She did not drive and depended on kind-hearted neighbors to get her groceries and supply her with fresh produce. Save for very occasional visits from my family that would last an hour or two before we returned to the Borscht Belt bungalow colony an hour east of there where we spent our summers, she seldom had visitors. I hated those visits, particularly when I was very young. In stark contrast to my maternal grandmother, Eva was a terrible cook whose only decent company dish was sweet cucumber salad. Her kitchen was chaotic, dirty, a mess, and the house was falling down around her. Challenges notwithstanding, Grandma Eva kept returning to that house on her own for months on end, for years after she could reasonably look after herself. Could this, I wonder, be my future? At some level, I've always feared turning into Grandma Eva. For one thing, I believe I bear a strong physical resemblance to her, as did my father. For another, she was incredibly self-absorbed and given to self-pity. She would immediately tell strangers the tragic story of her life, how she lost everything in World War II, from the fashion atelier she and my grandfather owned in Vienna, to her eldest son, the light of her life, my father's brother who died in battle in the Philippines. She was no Joe Biden. She didn't turn her loss into empathy for others. 40 years after the fact, she would burst into tears publicly over her son's tragic death. Peter always made fun of my similar proclivity to bemoan my fate. Why me? Eva was far more justified than me in feeling that her life resembled the tribulations of Job. But as repelled as I was by her public dwelling on her life's challenges, I was drawn inexorably to share mine. Of course, Grandma Eva was a complex woman who had many admirable traits as well, though it was not until I was at least of college age that I began to appreciate them. She was an intellectual who respected the life of the mind. Family lore was that she was instrumental in ways never explained to us in helping to save Thomas Mann's papers. She was my only champion in the family when I decided to go to graduate school rather than law school, and then the only disappointed one when I abandoned anthropology for a law degree that she, a communist in her younger life, saw as constituting dirty commerce. She was also resourceful. The 1938 German annexation of Austria, the Anschluss, happened as she was bringing her infant daughter, my father's younger sister, to visit family in her native town Busk, which is now in the western Ukraine but was then in the Polish part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Using her Austrian passport and what few valuables she had with her, she made her way with her daughter across Russia, thence to Yokohama, and from there via San Francisco to Brooklyn before the war broke out. Later in life, her ability to soak up life's experience on a budget was evidenced when she came to London, where my family was then living, for my bar mitzvah. She deposited her ailing husband with us, bought a Ural pass, and crisscrossed the continent on her own for a month, with a couple of changes of clothes, taking overnight trains virtually everywhere to avoid paying hotel bills. Even when, as a young adult, I came to appreciate her values and her resilience, I can't say that I understood Grandma Eva's devotion to her house in the Catskills. I couldn't imagine what she got from an existence that seemed to consist chiefly of living alone, nurturing her peonies, and reading on the front porch. But now I think I get it. Taking care of the plant life around the house was her way of being grounded in the universe while she otherwise lived in her mind. And doing it so resolutely on her own, with occasional help from kind neighbors, was her affirmation of a capacity to control her own destiny, even as the universe seemed to conspire against that autonomy. I suppose I could do worse than become Grandma Eva.
Agriculture is underwritten by Turkana Farms, LLC, a small-scale producer of heritage-bred livestock and a wide array of vegetables and berries on just over 39 acres in Germantown, New York. More information, 518-537-3815.